Looping game design is absolutely fascinating. I gave a whole 45-minute presentation live on my Twitch stream about looping game design and tabletop RPGs. So without further ado, I'm Extragalactic Unicorn. Let's get into it. Alright, here we go. So I'm not gonna put this into PowerPoint mode, unfortunately. Because when I did put this into PowerPoint mode, it literally broke everything with OBS all at once. OBS does not like OpenOffice at all. I don't know what it is, but it just was like, nope, I am just gonna die or whatever. So anyway, welcome to my to my TED talk, guys. About make quest loops, not quest lines. Isn't that catchy? Little title, eh? So way this presentation is gonna work, I'm gonna say a bunch of you're free to just type in chat and talk and ask questions and shout out and do whatever. I'm not really like one for formal presentations or all that. I like to keep things quite chill and a bit more lectorial sort of style, I think. I think that's probably because I've been doing streaming a lot, and that's kind of what my presentation style has just sort of become, really. Feel free to ask questions and all that sort of stuff. It's all really cool. This is supposed to be a bit of a back and forth, and who knows? Maybe this will make it onto YouTube, guys. This might be the... I might decide to do the sensible streamer thing of make your Twitch stream stuff just your YouTube content, and double up on content, because that's, you know, efficient or something. I don't know. What's efficiency, guys? Oh, God. So, make quest loops, not quest lines. A very professional presentation by Extragalactic Unicorn that they've taken about 3 minutes to start. Right, let's go. What are quest loops and what are they helpful for? So first of all, quest loops are helpful when it comes to writing and narrative design. They're also helpful for level and mission design, and they are especially helpful for sandbox design. It's important to make this distinction, because I do believe that quest loops are like a really good way of building out levels. They're a good way of building out your plot lines for your stories. They're also a really good way of designing sandboxes. And I say, like, make quest loops, not quest lines, right? Like, that's a catchy title. My fundamental belief is always that a lot of design principles and a lot of ways of doing things are fun. Oh crap! I just dropped my my little fiddle toy, because I like to fiddle with things. Apologies. Yeah. So I kind of feel that a lot of these things are tools. They're fundamentally tools, right? And tools can be used in different ways, and they can also be abused. Because there's an interesting little anecdote about software anti-patterns, right? I think I talked about software anti-patterns in an earlier stream. And software anti-patterns are really cool. If you don't know what they are, 100% go look them up. There's a wonderful couple of sites which talk about them. But fundamentally, they are bad design and bad working habits for software. And software anti-patterns are literally like the things that you do that you shouldn't be doing. They're your bad habits, right? And it's not to say that oh no, you should never do them or anything like that. Or you should be shamed because you're doing them, right? It's fundamentally something that people do, and that's kind of okay. One of the software anti-patterns that I'd like to quote here is called the Golden Hammer. And the Golden Hammer is a tool which you know very well, And it is a tool which you will apply to every single problem, right? It's the golden hammer, it's the golden ticket. It will always solve the problem. Not every instance of it will always solve the problem is a golden hammer, okay? But golden hammers do exist, and it's important to think about that software anti-pattern when you're thinking about your next project and what the best tool for the job is. You should always be thinking, is this the best tool? And taking a analytical approach to understanding that concept, right? Like what you're going to do. Because ultimately, if you're, and we'll see this in the presentation, right? Quest loops are a really interesting little design principle. They shouldn't be used in every circumstance, and you always need to keep in mind your own use case, basically. So now we know what they're helpful for. Let's talk about what these things are. So what is a quest line? What am I talking about when I say quest line? Because we're gamers, right? Everyone plays video games. We all kind of probably have an idea of what a quest line is. So let's define quest line here, first of all. A quest line is a set of scenes which are played by a player, one after the other. Because we're talking about tabletop RPGs with this presentation here a little bit. It's kind of aimed a bit more towards that, because that's what we talk about a lot of the time on over on YouTube and all that sort of stuff, right? So these scenes can be confrontational, they can be expositional, or they can be establishing scenes. So if you think about in Dungeons and Dragons, for example, if you think about an encounter, all an encounter is in a narrative is a confrontational scene with some sort of action element. And invariably, you're using that encounter for some specific reason, right? You could be using them as part of the game loop to simulate some sort of combat, to generate some sort of fun for the players. You could also be using it to fill some sort of narrative purpose. So you could be having like a confrontation with the bad guy, and you could make the fight about something specific, and you can use game mechanics to like mimic what what that narrative is supposed to be. Etc., right? Like there's lots of ways of doing confrontational scenes. Expositional scenes, scenes where you're probably sitting down, you're role playing amongst each other. It's at the tavern or something like that, and you're just talking about what's going on, or your players are meeting with an NPC, and you're establishing what's gonna happen, as it were. You're explaining what's going on. Establishing scenes, they might be more narrations from the DM, or setting up other plot lines by sort of showing something else going on that the players aren't aware of, sort of thing. There's a lot of different kind of scenes in a quest line. And as a quest designer, invariably what you do with a quest line is you'll put them one after the other. And we'll see some examples of this in a minute. So scenes flow one after the other in a logical order. Okay, like it's a no-brainer, right? The stories have a natural order to things. You'll go from your introduction to your your confrontation, and then have an exposition scene and explain what's going on, etc. Right? And at the end of the story is concluded and wrapped up. That's a really, really bad English thing that I've written there. At the end of the story is concluded and wrapped up. It's kind of, okay, that kind of makes sense, but I'm not particularly happy with that sentence. But yeah, basically, to quote Matt Groening, right? At the end, everything revolves back to like where it all started. And I freaking hate that quote from Matt Groening, by the way. Like, at the end of every Simpsons episode, everything should end up the same. Because I think it very drastically misunderstands the value of character development. It's not necessarily that everything's wrapped up and everything's the same. It's simply that that arc has concluded successfully, and everybody has moved on in whatever way that they are supposed to move on, basically. But anyway, so that is basically what a quest line is. Very simple, I know. What is a quest loop? Oh my, is this the same slide? A quest loop is a set of scenes which are played by a player one after the other. Yeah, it is. These scenes can be confrontational, expositional, establishing, etc., etc. Yeah. Scenes flow one after the other in a logical order. Yep, 100%. That's how scenes should work, right? And at the end, the story is concluded and wrapped up. Absolutely, 100%. You might have plot, as we were just saying, you might have character development, which fundamentally changes things. You might have something which leads you on to another quest line or a quest loop. But I think what I'm highlighting with this slide, right, is quest line and a quest loop fundamentally are kind of the same thing. You're not designing two very different concepts here. Quest lines and quest loops, at the end of the day, you're still going to have all the basic moving parts of a narrative. You're going to have the basic moving parts of your encounters, of your story or your tabletop RPG quest, right? So they are different things. So what actually is the difference? And I think the best way of actually showing off the difference between these two is to talk about real world examples. Because I think otherwise you could get far too abstract. And I can cope with abstract concepts, guys, but I much prefer like hardcore, like real things, as it were, to kind of base in reality or whatever. So let's talk about what the difference is in. So let's look at Skyrim. Skyrim is an amazing freaking example of of what I would refer to as quest lines, basically. So how does Skyrim work fundamentally? Well, you go into a dungeon, you fight some Draugr, you solve a puzzle, and we all know how obvious these frickin' puzzles are once you know the frickin' solutions to them, like Jesus Christ. So I say puzzle in very, very rudimentary terms. Suppose it is a puzzle. And then you get a reward at the end, and then you leave your dungeon, right? It's a very linear path that Bethesda make. And invariably, this is how basically everything in Skyrim functions. Even if you have a quest where you go and talk to NPCs, invariably they all still work the same way. You go to one point, you go do something else, and you go... I totally didn't need 2 hours on figuring that one out when I first played it. Bro, did you not watch, this is what pisses me off about the Dragon Claw thing, right? They actually went and showed off the, solution to the Dragon Claw, puzzle at, Gamescom or something, or E3 that year, when they did the big Skyrim showcase. So everybody who was hyped for Elder Scrolls and watched E3 just immediately knew the solution to the puzzle. It's and what pissed me off so much is, right, because I think Bleak Falls Barrow is the demo dungeon which they showed off. So I was expecting a bunch of dungeons with a bunch of different puzzles, and then they just kept reusing the same puzzle. But this is how this actually pulls me wonderfully into that point, because this is about how Bethesda in Skyrim started designing quests, and they designed quests with a very set pattern in mind. This fundamentally, if you break down every single dungeon in Skyrim, this is how they work. And yeah, they might do a slightly different like encounter. You know, we might not be fighting Draugr, right? We might be fighting bandits. We might be fighting something else, trolls, or all sorts of other like things. There might be an interesting confrontation scenario here where there's like a lot of like cover or like some sort of environmental hazard. Whatever level design is going on here can't really be understated, right? Like there's something going on here that's more than just that. They needed some sort of immersive tutorial hint. You can rotate the objects around. Oh yeah, I think so. It was probably something like that. But then again, there's so much other non-immersive tutorial stuff in Skyrim, I seem to recall, so I'm not quite sure about that one. I think it was just a case of somebody designed the puzzle, and then they got crunched for time and couldn't design more or something, or somebody, namely Todd Howard, probably said, no, that's just how they're all going to work, because that makes sense. That's like a repeatable thing. And this is what I'm saying, right? Is that, yeah, all of these dungeons are repeatable, and they all work the same way, and Bethesda probably built them this way because it was easy, right? Because let's be real here. You're a big game design company, or a game publisher, and you know something that works. So you know this particular formula works, just find a way of repeating it over and over again, because that's what fun is, right? Players like fun. This thing is fun, and a video game is just all about repeating fun, right? Makes sense, huh? And that's why we get a lot of these kind of like design patterns and stuff like that. I mean, I don't like bullying Skyrim, because Skyrim is quite I think is still quite a good game, but at the end of the day, it does do a lot of this like pattern design sort of principle stuff. Witcher 3, which everybody harps a lot of praise on and says is much better than Skyrim, does this as well to some degree. So we can't really dig into Skyrim too much. Yeah, it just works. Yeah, exactly. So why would you change it, you know? So this is how Skyrim is basically working. And every single dungeon, every single questline is the same. You go into like your thing, you get involved in the conflict, you might have to solve some sort of issue, and then you get your reward at the end. And they are very simple. One thing leads into another, the next thing leads into the next thing, and then you end, and then you move on. You're done, right? You've cleared the dungeon. It's ticked off now on your map. I think does Skyrim give you ticks whenever you finish like a dungeon? I seem to vaguely remember that's a detail that I may have forgotten. Like it actually like grays it out or adds a small little tick to say you've been here and you've done everything, so you don't go back or something like that. I seem to vaguely remember that's a thing, or maybe that's a mod I had. I can't remember. So if this is our example of a quest line, let's have a look at an example of a quest loop. And our quest loop is Dark Souls, everybody. So if you don't know an awful lot about me, you know I hate Dark Souls. Or at least I don't like Souls-like games in general, because I'm just not. I don't spend the time enough to get good, right? So that's really all it is. But it is an incredibly good example, and all of the like Souls-like games do this as well. Is an incredibly good example of looping design and how looping design is really, really fun for a player. So fundamentally, Dark Souls does kind of work the same way as Skyrim. You go into our dungeon. This is the Undead Burg or whatever it is. This is the only dungeon in Dark Souls I did because I'm crap. You go fight some Draugr or some skeletons or whatever. You solve a puzzle, quote unquote, and I put the quotes around the puzzle because I know the Taurus Demon boss is not a puzzle and Dark Souls bosses are not a puzzle. But invariably, the way that you tend to solve Dark Souls bosses is you figure out the gimmick behind the fight, or not necessarily the gimmick. Sorry, that's the wrong term to use. But you understand how the fight flows. You understand what FromSoft are trying to teach you about how to beat the game, and then you come up with your own solution to the quote unquote puzzle of how do I beat the boss, basically. And that's kind of how I view like Dark Souls bosses a little bit. They're kind of puzzles in a way. And then once you've done that, well, there's more stuff to do in the Undead Burg if you want to. You can actually go back into our dungeon here. And you can go and take a little look at some of the sort of side areas of the Undead Burg, because the Undead Burg is designed in a way where it kind of is a bit of a straight line to the Taurus Demon. But there are other passages that you can take, and they lead to other areas. Some with big old Black Knight creatures or whatever that will just one-tap you. There's also skeletons, which are like, a bit tougher than everything else. That you kind of need to know what you're doing in order to beat and stuff like that. You can go back to Firelink Shrine, or you can continue on to the Undead Parish, which is almost like your next level, basically. Because Firelink Shrine also has these other paths, which are kind of gated by difficulty. And invariably, you have a lot of choice about how to tackle your next challenge, basically. And this kind of neatly kind of segues me into explaining really what the real difference is between a quest line and a quest loop. The first, I suppose, quest of Dark Souls is go beat the Taurus Demon, basically. Or at least it's kind of left for you to figure out that that's what really you should be doing. That's at least what my friend told me was the first thing you should be doing. But invariably, it kind of lets you do what you want to do. And if you're strong enough, and if you're tough enough and clever enough, you can go and do something else and almost break that intended like golden path, basically. And invariably, a lot of these splits are on earlier or immediate areas that you can wander into if you want. You'll just have a bad time if you do, and you're supposed to come back there when you're stronger. And that is the key thing with Dark Souls. You come back to these places when you are stronger, and then you experience other content. The content that is in the Undead Burg is not all the starting content. It's not one quest line, it's a whole area of little mini bosses, little hidden shops, other encounters that you just didn't see because they're off the beaten path, or other areas for you to explore. And that is how a quest loop kind of differentiates itself from a quest line. Quest lines are divorced from previous content entirely. They are one and done. They fundamentally are just doing one quest line. They're separated from everything else. A quest loop links back to previous content and gives it new relevancy. And that's the key separation between a quest line and a quest loop, really. So let's talk a little bit about why is a quest loop a good thing? Well, quest loops, believe it or not, are probably cheaper and much more efficient to build from a tabletop RPG perspective. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to remember a couple of one-note NPCs that you're just going to be using for a particular quest line, right? Everything ends up tied into each other, so you actually are much more efficient with how many NPCs, how many connections, how all the people that you are using. It is a lot less to sort of hold in your head when you are not thinking about, okay, now we're going to be doing this particular quest line that particular day. We're just doing the campaign, and the campaign is all like this sprawling web of connections because it's all looped into each other, basically, if that makes sense. It makes the environments feel connected, more bustling, and more real, because let's face it, right? If you're designing from a quest line perspective, and you give the captain of the guard, for it, let's say, a quest line to go and steal, like take down some thief or something, and then that's your quest line. Well, why isn't the thief also talking with the murderer that you're also tracking down, which is another separate quest line or something like that? Why do they not know about it? Why is there not a fence which actually gave the murderer the weapon to go and kill somebody with, that also is working with the thief to, go and fence stolen goods and stuff like that? And that's what I talk about when I say things are connected and loop into each other. Because you've now gone and dealt with the thief quest line, you can now jump over to the murderer quest line if you want to, because you can talk to the fence, right? It's almost like you've built in what is effectively a shortcut into your mission design. And the other thing that you could do is you could just hand in the thief, not bother with the fence, right? In this hypothetical scenario, and you could then go and talk to the intended quest giver. Let's say it's like a local lord or a local official about these murders or something like that, and you could go in through it that way. And this is the real strength of sort of building these kind of loops, basically, where you have everything related to each other. It avoids one-note NPCs, as I sort of said. It gives you really easy access to foreshadowing, and it makes players feel really clever when they quote-unquote figure something out, right? Because if something is relevant, or if you show like a loop that is kind of closed off, unless you've done something else, which is loops back into earlier content, then players will go, now that thing that I noticed that I wasn't sure about in like session 1 or something, that's now a thing. That's relevant now. Wow, I knew that was gonna be a thing. And then you can look at them and say, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. I'm a clever DM, and I just put random shit in my game. There we go. And this is why you should be thinking about this kind of looping design when you are talking about your tabletop RPGs. Sounds very Metroidvania. In a way, yes, I'd say. There's a lot of video games which use this design philosophy, especially a lot of earlier video games. That it was huge back in the 90s. Like Doom does it a lot. Doom has is entirely made from looping game design, right? I personally feel that's slightly to Doom's disservice. I don't overly like it in Doom, and that's why I say, right, that looping game design is a tool. It's not a like a silver bullet. Nothing is at the end of the day. But a lot of video games do have used this in the past, and a lot of them do continue to use it because it's a really good way of building very lived-in, very dynamic sandboxes. And I think that's what the main thing that this is useful for. It's building sandboxes and such. Because if we look about why this is bad, well, if we're building loops and notes for all over the place, environments are more complex, notes and triggers are a lot more complicated. if you start to go back to our murderer and thief example that I was just talking about, you might not want to go to the effort to build in that whole fence connection, right? Because you might not want to have to worry about another NPC. You might be strapped for time, and that's something to sort of keep in mind. You might think, okay, I've got two big plot lines that I've got to think about for this session. I don't want to have to think about another one as well. Having a huge amount of world in your head at the same time is not something that you can just kind of do, right? I actually feel like as a dungeon master, as a storyteller, that kind of comes with practice. And it also comes with like being able to make a lot of like notes. I kind of talked about in an earlier video, I believe, that I kind of feel that more modern tabletop RPG players aren't so good at making notes on things and remembering things, because I think they're more used to the sort of more action orientated Dungeons and Dragons there's a lot of the time that's around nowadays. They're not so used to the let's use our brains and investigate and do a mystery sort of thing, right? Because people think mysteries are hard, and it's easy to just say, okay, as a dungeon master, let's just kill some skeletons tonight, you know? So I think that, and that's not necessarily about like their fault either as well. Like that's something that's learned, and I think it's something that's developed over a period of time. So I don't think it's one of those techniques which you can really just start using if you're a beginner. You certainly could try, I'd say, but I do think it's a bit more of a complicated technique because you need to understand how more than like two elements fit together, basically. And you know it sounds a little bit pedantic by saying more than two, right? But there's a lot of stuff you've got to keep in your head when you're doing that dungeon master role, and it's not just thinking about is the plot line all working? What is the plot line going forward? There's so much other stuff as well. Like you're wondering if people are bored on their phone. You're trying to keep tension up. You're trying to like remember all the rules. You're trying to make sure, oh yeah, I better not say that particular one thing about the plot because that will give the game away and then we'll all have to go home or something like that. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about that one. Have you ever just started thinking about like something you shouldn't say to somebody or something you shouldn't say to like the table because it'll ruin the whole thing, and then that's the only thing you can think about is let's say that. I'm like, no, don't say that. That's terrible. Oh man. But anyway, yeah, so if players aren't paying attention as well, they might miss things. That's another thing as well. I kind of feel like this is very much a technique where players have to take note of things and realize things if they're kind of on autopilot and they're kind of just going through the levels, right? They're wanting to get to the combat or something like that. It may not necessarily be the technique you should be using because I think if your players are much more I kind of use the term like role play rather than role play. Like talking about rolling dice and such like that, because if players aren't necessarily paying too much attention to the story, it's very clear they're just there for the combat and the board game side of D&D, and that's totally a fine way of playing the game, right? That's very, very that's very valid. It's not necessarily the way I would want to play, but 100% it's a way that I can see the game being played. So if your campaign is more of an excuse to drive your players from like encounter to encounter, which it's totally fine to have as well. because at the end of the day, you might just love really cool, interesting encounters. And at the end of the day, that's actually where a lot of the Warcraft 3 plotline comes from at the end of the day. Yeah, it's not necessarily the design for everybody, you know, your players might miss stuff basically if you're if you're trying to make things too convoluted, and you always have to design to the players, and that's okay. It also takes longer to build out the concept of what you're doing because you've got to think about all of these tie-ins, all of these little plot hooks that tie into other plot hooks, basically. It's going to take you longer to think about all of those because invariably what you have to do is you have to look at your quest, and then you'll have to go back over it multiple times. That's basically what I do when I start designing a lot of this stuff. Is I'll go back over quest lines and I'll make them loops. Basically, I'll design them as lines first, and then I'll go and like make them loopy a little bit, basically. Because at the end of the day, I'll sketch. I kind of view it as sketching out in art or something like that, where an artist has like a rough sketch of something, and then they actually go over and do the proper lines and stuff like that. That's kind of how I start padding out a lot of my like loop quests, basically, and quests that tie into each other. And yeah, basically, at the end of the day, it's going to take you longer to build. It's going to be more complex, but the payoff is you get a really, really nice sandbox. You get your players really invested because they start to realize all of the connections, and then they go, oh crap, I actually have to be paying attention. I actually am invested. I have to make sure I look at stuff and engage with things. And if I theorycraft, invariably, if I start to figure out that sort of stuff, I might end up right. And when I think some of my favorite moments in tabletop RPGs has to be when players suddenly put 2 and 2 together, and then they say 4, and then I go, yeah, I was saying 4 all the time, and you just figured it out. Well done, you know? And they've gone and sort of realized what the mystery was all about, and they were really sort of happy. They've had that they've had that moment where everything has clicked for them, basically. So there you go, everyone. That is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed my my little. I think, how long have we gone? We're going 45 minutes. Jeez. My little ramble about making quest loops, not quest lines. So there you go. Thank you for watching. If you've really enjoyed this, then please feel free to give the video a like. It helps an absolute bunch. If you had any thoughts specifically about looping game design and tabletop RPGs, I'd love to hear about them. Feel free to leave a comment. And furthermore, if you want more tabletop RPG advice, or if you want to look at some of my video game critique, then feel free to subscribe to the channel and check out another video. Thank you very much for watching. Cheerio.